But part of, I think, our journey as human beings is to, our aim is to help heal the wounded child that's in us, that's still innocent and still looking at the flowers and still looking at the sky and still pointing out things, as infuriating as that is, in the wonder and the beauty of following like a 3-year-old little girl around, where she points things out and you're trying to like just get from A to B. I've done some walks with Wonder Grace Gretzinger and Stephanie's little girl, and it's the most beautiful and infuriating thing. Infuriating for my element of time because I'm trying to get from point A to point B. But it's also, if I succumb to it, if I succumb to her wonder, if I succumb to her practice of paying attention, then I start to actually unravel. I start to unwind. I start to see what she sees, and then I start to heal my own wounded child. Does that make sense? And so for me, like the who is kind of imperative because I find that we're all trying to heal our wounded child that lives in us, no matter how old we are. We carry every single age we've ever been. And so wherever that fissure started, wherever that, that thing happened where we started, I'm sure there's, been some talk of performing our way through life. You might hear us talk about that a little bit. It's a word that we tend to talk about. But there's a split that happens. We come, this is, again, my opinion, but we tend to come into life pretty whole and pretty free. You watch toddlers, they don't have a split in their personality. When they come into the world, they just are fully themselves wherever they are. Like, I was watching Ryder out on the AstroTurf. I was going to say the lawn, but let's be honest. I was watching him on the AstroTurf, and we were just sitting over there chatting, and I was like, he's not second-guessing where he's going or what's next. He's literally flinging his body around, just like laughing and giggling and expecting someone to show up and partake in the magic of being alive, right? And of course we need to grow up. Of course we need to learn how to walk and talk and become aware of our faculties. We can't just fling our bodies around forever. That would be kind of a disaster. But there is something about being wholehearted that we forget. And it's all right. We just need to remember it. This is part of what Jesus did for us on the cross, I believe. When Stephanie has this talk about how the one man next to Jesus on the cross was asking Jesus to remember him in paradise. What he wasn't asking was for Jesus to like try to remember his name as though Jesus would forget him. He was asking for him to recollect and remember what had been dismembered of him, right? And so for me, writing has become a spiritual practice of remembrance. It's become a spiritual practice of actually starting to track with the pieces like breadcrumbs that bring me back to those little moments when I became fragmented, or I started performing for something that was my birthright. Please hear the difference for me. Performance arts are not a problem. When we use the term performing for something for our birthright, it's an attitude towards life we're talking about, not that performing in and of itself is bad. Does that make sense? So for me, I have found that with writing, writing just simply became more of a necessity for my own spiritual practice of finding the breadcrumbs back to the beginning and remembering the things that I had forgotten. It's a way of salvation, perhaps, because that's part of our salvation. And if we're going to write anything spiritual, towards the pursuit of God, which I'm assuming everyone in this room, that's part of what you feel called to. Not the whole, but part, right? Then we owe it to ourselves to go on that walk in the wild, right? All right, so I hope this is helpful. It's become more of a spiritual practice out of necessity. I would love to say that I just woke up one day and decided I'm gonna be a writer and I'm gonna get a bird tattoo and it's just all gonna it's just all gonna flow from the heavens through my pen and the rest of my life is just, it makes sense. Like it's it's kind of an infuriating, I keep using that word, but it kind of is. It's a wrestle. I'm not going to lie. It's a wrestle. I think the path that we need to subject ourselves to in order to become scribes of our generation, which I believe that we're held accountable to. We wouldn't have the Bible if there weren't some teenagers following Jesus around, jotting down what he did and said. And make no mistake, they were teenagers and they were paying attention and they were jotting things down. Julia Cameron, you might want to write her name down. She's one of my favorite authors on the subject of creativity and writing. And she just talks about how writing is more about the spiritual practice of jotting something down rather than thinking something up. Whenever you try to think something up in order to write it down, it usually involves ego. It usually involves I'm trying to write something. But when we just close our eyes and start typing or access that place where we're the point is to pay attention and jot it down. You know what I mean? It's what you come out with, it feels a bit more honest, a bit more truthful. And all of us go through that. I mean, there's so many drafts that I've written where I'm like, well, that's total. Fill in the blank. You know what I mean? And you need to be able to have those drafts. You need to be able to put your ego on the page. You need to be able to put it all on the page. This is not about elevating one thing above the other for me. Writing is it's the crux. It's the level ground where everything meets everything and we can be that unwound. Does that make sense? Because I think sometimes whenever we elevate one over the other, whenever we elevate something other than, then actually our mind will take that, our psyche will take that, and we'll start creating constructs before we've even started writing anything. Not fair. Not fair. The page is where you get to be blunt, you get to be brash, you get to be honest, you get to swear, you get to tell your story, you get to tell your truth, as though everyone that you know who would point a finger through the cosmos and fact check you is dead. So sorry. It's very, very brash. I realize that. And let me tell you why. This is something that Anne Lamott, who's also one of my favorite authors on the subject, she writes about how our need to be honest actually trumps everything else. So for the sake of your own soul, for the sake of my own soul, for the sake of our own humanity, we have to treat the page as though it's never going to judge us. No one's going to, that is not going to have an opinion about what's right or wrong. We are just simply writing. This is the starting point. We are simply writing to find out where our wounded child is still speaking. We're just writing to find the breadcrumbs back to the beginning. We're just starting our journey as people to scribe, to pay attention to the things that are helping us in our development as human beings. Does that make sense? And this then in turn, what happens with this is this actually starts to help you in creating a whole life. It's like therapy. It's like a piece of the pie. It's not the whole, it's a piece of it, right? But I don't know what has shut writing down more for me except for coming into a space where it's already been decided, like these are the things you can and can't do. That's just crafting and knowing time and space. What I want to do is deal with the fact that if we can't be honest on a white blank page that no one's ever going to see, when will we be?